So to recap and kind of review, we are about to have the fulfillment of the first promise to Abraham, and the second or the fourth promise to Israel. In the covenant with Abraham, God said, I will make you a great nation. And we said the word nation, goy, means people with land. And there's one of the comments on the book of Joshua that Joshua repeats the word goy a lot. And there's also some chapters here. I didn't write that on the notes, but you can write it yourself if you want. In the chapters of the division of the land, there's a chapter about all. So all of what God had promised Israel, He had fulfilled. All the lands that He promised their grandparents, He had given them. All the things that He said He will do, He did. So this chapter has this all repeated over and over again in the book of Joshua. Also, the book of Joshua uses the word, like I said, goy, not people anymore. So by them entering the promised land, they become a nation, not just people. So this session in chapter 9 in our study is about the conquest of the land and moving from the first promise of Abraham to the second promise. What's the second promise? He says, I'll make your name great. And making his name great is by having a king's royalty. And this will be moving from a goy to a kingdom. And this is the transition. So they're entering the promised land. They're taking hold of the land to become a goy, to become a nation. And then we are going to prepare for the king, for a kingdom, so that they become the kingdom of God. The questions that we're asking, what events happened after the death of Moses? And then we're asking a question, so are the judges? Why we call them this way? Why Ruth is in the genealogy? It's in the genealogy of Christ. I think it's a typo again. Why is she in the genealogy of Christ, Ruth? How did Israel move from judges to monarchy? That's a very key question for today. What are the circumstances of the covenant with the king? What happened that around in starting the covenant with the king? This session will cover Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel. Let's start with the first question is, at the end of the life of Moses, what happened? They're prepared to enter the promised land. The whole point of Moses being sent to Egypt to bring the people of God to enter the promised land, take hold of it, and own it and divide it and become their land. And by having this land, they become a nation. The name Joshua, which is the book that we are going to find the details of the conquest of the promised land. The name Joshua, which means the Lord is salvation, is in Hebrew, Yeshua. In Greek, it's Isos. And it's in English, if you translate it properly in English, it will be Jesus. Joshua's original name was Hosea, but Moses changed his name to Joshua. This name change was prophetic, for it made Joshua a type of Jesus Christ. And Moses is the lawgiver. He gives the law. Could not bring Israel into the promised land, which shows that the law of Moses cannot save the people, but Joshua brought them in. And in this, he was a type of Jesus Christ who brings his own into heaven through grace. That's John Chrysostom in his commentary on, I think, the letter to the Hebrew. And he brings in this typology about Joshua. So this is a unique piece. And the fathers of the church had agreed this is something very prominent, and that Moses had to stop short of entering the promised land because he was not suitable as a lawgiver to enter the promised land. It had to be grace of the New Testament, and St. Paul would confirm that. The book of Joshua is the book, so we talked a little bit about Joshua himself. Let's talk about the book that documented the fulfillment of God's first promise to Abraham. And this is in chapter 12 of Genesis, verse 2. And the fourth promise to Israel. Remember how there were 4 promises and they commemorate them by 4 cups of wine in the Passover. So the cup number 4 was drunk to commemorate, to remember the 4th promise to Israel, which said, I'll take you to the land that I promised your grandparents. So this book of Joshua document the fulfillment of the promise of God to both Abraham and to his descendants. The book of Joshua divides neatly into 2 principal sections. Section 1, which are chapters 1 to 12, it's 24 chapters. So if you divide the book into equal halves, it will be 12 and 12. 1 to 12, 13 to 24. The 1 to 12 is about the fighting, the conquest, taking over the land. 13 to 24 describe the assignment of tribal territories and the dispersal of the tribes throughout the land of promise. Every tribe goes to their land. When they were in the desert, they were one camp, one group of people, huge group of people moving together. But then they entered the promised land, they took over the land as a group of people, and then they divided the land, and each tribe went to its appointed portion. The 2 sections, and a little bit more details, not a lot of details. The first section, which is the conquest of the land, the fighting, it starts with, I'm going to go through the chapters from 1 to 12 or 1 to 10. Choosing Joshua after the death of Moses, and the Lord's promise to be with him as he was with Moses. That's chapter 1. In this chapter, it's a very natural transition from Deuteronomy, the last book of the 5 books of Moses, to this historical book, Joshua. It's a very, very fitting transition because Deuteronomy ends with the death of Moses. Chapter 1 in Joshua starts with the transition of the leadership to Joshua. And God promises, I'll be with you like I was with Moses, and I will make you, I will prove you in the eyes of the people so that they will believe in you as they believed in Moses. So this was very fitting. That's chapter 1. Rahab and the story of spying Jericho. This time they learned the lesson. They didn't send 12 spies. They didn't need to do that. They sent only 2 spies to look at a specific city, that's Jericho. They wanted to look at this city because it was the fairest city in their conquest. Just keep that in mind. Jericho is the fairest city to enter into the promised land. I will show you on the map where Jericho is and why it is important that Jericho becomes a very famous city. Here it is. You see, they coming from the plains of Moab, and they cross the Jordan, and then in Gilgal, they do their circumcision. We wait a little bit and they camp. And then they send 2 spies to Jericho. Gilgal is not a city, it's a place. But the first real city with walls is this little town of Jericho. And it had fortification. It was a very special walls. They call those walls, the type of walls they found in the digging, casemate walls. What's a casemate wall? They make a wall and they make the houses between 2 walls to make the house itself a fort, a fortification. So you have multiple walls and people are living between them to enhance the strength of the walls. But when the attack happened, people in the houses by the wall, they might move inside the city. So Jericho is the first city in their conquest. Who lived in this city was Rahab. Who was Rahab? There's a word used in Hebrew that's a little bit ambiguous. The word can be translated into a hostess, which literally or commonly known as an innkeeper. But it can also mean a harlot, a prostitute. The Jewish rabbis has stayed away from that second understanding because it was a little bit demeaning to call one of their grandmothers a harlot. So they prefer to use an innkeeper or a hostess. So, and that's suitable because when the 2 spies wanted to lodge, they found no place but the house of Rahab and they stayed there, and she hid them. It was normal that strangers will take refuge in an inn, and the king will be looking for them. So Rahab kept the two spies. She believed in the God of Israel. She was very impressed by the news that she heard about him, and she wanted to be part of the people of God. And she told the spies. And the spies made a covenant. Again, they gave a covenant of peace. They told Rahab, we swear, and they swore by the name of God, of Yahweh, to protect Rahab and her house, as long as she hangs a crimson, a red scarlet thread from her window. So she hid them because her house was in the wall, part of the casemate fortification. She could lower them from the wall to outside the city, and they came back peacefully to their camp. That's chapter 2. Then chapter 3 speaks about the great event of crossing over the Jordan. By crossing the Jordan, it's a landmark. They actually entered the promised land. And when the whole people crossed the Jordan, they understood that God had fulfilled the promise he gave to Abraham. It began by crossing the Jordan. And the Jordan crossing for generations, since this story was told and the Christian church had inherited it, the crossing of the Jordan represented to us Christians ending of this age and beginning the age to come. We're going into our own promised land. The Jordan becomes the territory of that body of water. The water of the Jordan stopped at their right side as they entered, because they're entering from east to west, and the Jordan runs from north to south. So if you're going from east to west, and the water is coming from the north, it's coming on the right side, all of a sudden the water of the Jordan stopped as a wall, which was a smaller version of the Red Sea crossing. In the Red Sea, there were two walls, one on the right, one on the left, and the Jordan was only one at the right side. And how did it happen? When you read it in chapter 3, the priest carried the Ark of the Covenant, and then the priest moved ahead of all the congregation, a mile ahead, and they stepped into the water of the Jordan. And the second the soles of the feet of the priest touched the ground of the river, the water stopped. And this consecrated the water of the Jordan forever. When the water stopped, all the people crossed. And then when they crossed and finished crossing, Joshua ordered them to take 12 stones and set them and make almost like the pillars at the foot of Mount Sinai, made them at the bottom of the Jordan as a memorial that Israel had crossed the Jordan in that place. And the place is called Gilgal. So they would do that in chapter 4. They put the stones. And then once all the people left and the stones was erected, the priest with the Ark of the Covenant moved inside the promised land behind the congregation, and the water returned back to its normal course. Joshua encountered the commander of the heavenly army in circumstances similar to Moses encountering the Lord in the burning bush and the preparation for war. When he saw this man standing on his feet, and he looked at him and he said, Joshua said, are you for us or for our enemies? He said, I am the commander of the heavenly army, and I came here to help you prepare for war. And he gave him the instructions that priests should carry the Ark of the Covenant ahead of the people, and every day will do one circle around Jericho. On the seventh day, which is supposed to be the Sabbath, they turn around Jericho 7 times. And at the 7th time, everybody will shout, all the congregation will shout, and the walls will fall, and then they can take the city. And this is exactly what happened. People had kind of argued over who is this figure. Was it Archangel Michael? The Jewish rabbis in the later generations said it was Archangel Michael. The church thinks it was Christ himself. There was certain things in this encounter that said it was the same person of the burning bush, because he was asked, Joshua was asked to take his sandals off, like what happened with Moses. That's chapter 5. They did that, and in chapter 6, we see the fall of Jericho, the victory. And be careful now, the victory was made by priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant, not by soldiers. And here's 2 things. Just let you know this for ahead of time. The fact that the priests carried the Ark of the Covenant into the promised land, stopping the water of the river, and then knocking down the walls of Jericho, it shows that the priests in the kingdom of God are the real force, the real power of the kingdom. If you want to knock down the power of Israel, you start by knocking down the priests. And this is what will happen in the time of Samuel. And we're gonna hear about that. From that time on, Israel understood when they want to conquer in a fight, they take the priest, they take the Ark of the Covenant and go forward to make victory. Because Jericho was the first city and was to be consecrated to God as the first fruit of the promised land, God asked them to not keep anything alive and not to take anything from that city. No gold, no silver, no slaves, nothing. Completely burn everything. And if there is something that is non-perishable, like gold or silver or bronze, they will bring it to the tabernacle. Some family had found some very good stuff and it was very precious and they couldn't let go of it. And they took it and they hid it under their tent. I think it's Achan. His name is Achan, the family of Achan. So the consecration was not complete. They went into the second city. Here is the second city. What is the second city after Jericho? And the second city after Jericho is Ai. Because the consecration of Jericho was not complete, they lost their strength. Actually, this Jericho chapter 6, the victory. The second city in chapter 7, they were defeated. And they were crying. And Joshua said, what happened? What's wrong? And they asked God, and the oracle came saying, because somebody had stolen something from the Jericho. And when they did the Urim and Tamim, like I told you, they ask different questions, yes or no. So they will take tribes, and they say, is it the tribe of Judah? And they pick up the stone, and the stone says, no, the red stone. And then you go into the next tribe, and the next tribe, and next tribe. They spend maybe a day or even two answering questions, one tribe at a time, until the family of Achan, who Joshua asked and said, what have you done? And he was punished for this. They were executed. And so the correction happened by execution. That's chapter 8. And then when the situation was corrected, Ai was taken easy. Now, this again show you that the fight over the promised land, because it's all magic, it's all made on the promise of God. When the person actually departs from the commandments of God and they start playing around it and they start doing things that's not supposed to be done, they lose their strength. They lose their victory because their victory is from God. If they are not with him and if they're not obedient, over and over again, they will be defeated. They will lose what God has given them. To show us as the New Testament people over and over again, it is not by our own power or by our own might or our own effort. Yes, we need to do something, but it's basically by obedience and holiness. Obedience and holiness. In chapter 9, a very interesting incident will happen. A group of people, they are called the Gibeonites from Gibeah. They came over to the people of God while they were in the promised land. They're not coming out of the promised land. They're actually inside the promised land after taking over Ai. And they told them, we are your neighbors. We're coming from a very far country. And we heard about the great victories that your God had done. And we want to make a covenant with you. What does a covenant mean? They're going to have to make them their own kin, their own family. It's like a treaty. They want to have them swear by God they will not fight them. And Joshua very naively, you can say that, and the fathers of the church defended Joshua and the leaders of the tribes came together and said, these people are coming to us, look at them. And they said they were dressed in rags. They have moldy bread in their hand and dry bread, and they are filled, like covered with dust. Said, we've been traveling for a long time. Look at us. We're coming from a very far country. We want to make a treaty. So Joshua and the leaders said, you're not in the middle of the land. You're not amongst us. Said, no, we are not. They lied, of course, to protect themselves because they knew these people are coming to take the land and kick everybody else out. So the Gibeonites received the promise with a swearing, with an oath, after lying to Joshua. And they swore by God not to do anything for them. But then when they entered the promised land and found them in the center of the promised land, Joshua said, why did you do that? A very interesting question. Of course, because we're afraid for our lives and the life of our kids and families. Joshua said, because you have done this, and the leader said, we cannot go back on the covenant. We're going to make you always the lowest of trades in this. You're going to fill water for us. You're going to be our servants. You're going to be. And the Gibeonites said, do whatever you want. As long as we live, we're fine. Then they start making the wars. And the wars is chapters 10 to 13. Chapters 10 to 13, it was wars. But I want to tell you something about the wars, because some people would say, why would God do this to people? And the first thing we want to know is, this was not favoring Israel over the Canaanites. The Canaanites were actually condemned people. That were what God had said already to Abraham, and we saw this in chapter 15 of Genesis. They had a judgment written about them. They were actually to be executed. And God said in the beginning, I will take care of that. You don't have to, like in Sodom and Gomorrah. But then when Israel started to do the same things they did, God said, you will have to do it yourself, so you can actually have a history. What happened to people when they are acting in this abominable way? The Gibeonites will have a history with us when we come into the book of Samuel. We're going to talk about them again. There was a promise with an oath, a promise with an oath that makes a covenant with the Gibeonites not to be killed or hurt. The second section of Joshua from 13 to 24 is the division of the land, the cities of the refuge. What's the cities of refuge? In summary, it is a place, a city, where when you call it involuntary manslaughter, somebody kills someone by mistake. Like today, when somebody hits someone with a car, there is no intention in doing the murder. They just kill them by mistake. So in that case, for example, someone's oxen run with the horns into somebody's back or belly and they die. So there's a murder, there is a killing, and the oxen killed the man. So if the family of the victim wanted to take revenge on the murderer or his family, the murderer can run to those cities, and if they enter the city, they can stay in that city. And as long as they don't leave that city, the victim's family cannot kill them. When can they leave the city? When the high priest of the time dies. When the high priest dies, they relieve them from that quarantine. So there were cities of refuge scattered all over Israel. And there are also Levitical cities, and these are chapter 13 to 24. What are the Levitical cities? They give the Levites and the priests places to live. They didn't give them a special tribe portion. They just scattered them all over Israel. What is the purpose of that? So they will be teaching Israel holiness. They will be the one to teach Israel the ways of God. So they had to live among them. 2.5 tribes, this is extra piece of information, chose to settle east of the Jordan. The king of Bashan and Sihon, the king of the Amorites. Remember, in the time of Moses, they fought those two kings, and you read about them in the second host or the first host of Tasbeha, the second host. This was the Amorites, and the Bashanites are actually east of the Jordan. If you look at them, here it is. And notice here that Manasseh is a hugest piece of land. Half of it is east of the Jordan. Half of it is west of the Jordan. Gad is east of the Jordan. Reuben is east of the Jordan. Those one tribe, Reuben, two tribes, Gad, half tribe Manasseh, are east of the Jordan. This is the land of Bashan, where the king, his name was Og, and they killed him, and the Israelites in the fight while Moses was still alive. And then the king of Sihon, the king of the Amorites. So the Amorites and the Bashanites were killed or were defeated, and the land was taken by these 2.5 tribes. Although it's a huge half tribe, but still a half tribe. Manasseh was a big, big, big tribe. So these were very good land for shepherds. It was not actually a good land for agriculture, it was for shepherds. And these 2.5 tribes found it very suitable for them, and they wanted to take over them. But Joshua said, okay, you want to take those lands? You have, before we give you those lands and you settle in them, make a promise to go with the rest of the tribes and clean the promised land itself, so that as they helped you in this fight, you help them in their fights. And when they are settled, you can go back and live in this land that you chose. And they agreed. So these 2.5 tribes will always be on the east side of the Jordan. Notice here, the Jordan is running between 2 bodies of water, and the north body of water is a sweet water lake, Sea of Galilee, and the south body of water is very salty, bitter water. That's the saltiest water on earth. It is so salty that if you leave something organic in it, it will disintegrate. There is no living creature in this sea. So, but the river runs from north to south. Nowadays, there's no water running from north to south anymore. Very little. They are out of water in Israel. So let me show you where the tribes settled. Okay. This piece here, the Manasseh, Gad, Ephraim is Samaria in the time of Christ. This piece here is Galilee, where the Sea of Galilee is. So you have Asher, Naphtali, Zebulun, and Issachar. This is Galilee, what we know as Galilee today. And then Dan, Ephraim, Benjamin, and Gad, this is Samaria. And then you go down, and this is Judah, or Judea. That's Judah, a little bit of Benjamin, of course, because just from there, and then Simeon. How many tribes we have now? Count with me. 1, Asher, 2, Naphtali, Zebulun 3, Issachar 4, Manasseh 5, Gad 6, Reuben 7, Ephraim 8, Dan 9, Benjamin 10, Judah 11, Simeon 12. 12 tribes. Here, Simeon is actually in the belly of Judah. And notice here, this is Kadesh. This is the territory with the plains of Moab. This is Moab. Moab and Edom. When we go to the next book, we have the third part, or the end of the second part, is speeches that Joshua will give to the people after they settle. There were 2 incidents that we need to speak of them quickly. When they settled, Joshua told them, you have to understand that this land was given to you by God according to a covenant. And right now you are in the promised land, but you have to make a choice. Either you want to serve the gods of the land, because they're actually living among Canaanites. And we'll talk about that in a minute. Living among Canaanites. So you can have the choice to serve the gods of the Canaanites or the gods of the Egyptians, or you want to serve Yahweh, who brought you up to this point and had you and given you the land. And if you want, you can serve any other god. That's your choice. But as for me and my house, we will serve Yahweh. And he was very firm about this. And the people said, no, we'll serve Yahweh. We are the servants of Yahweh. He said, you can't. And if you don't do it, you will be in trouble, because he's not going to forgive you. And they said, no, we will do it. We will do it. He said, now today you are witnesses against yourselves that you want to serve God, and beware. And if when I die and I go, you will be turning away from him, and there will be very bad times for you. And they continued to argue and say, no, we will do it. We will do it.